Okay, I think we'll probably get started just with the easy stuff first, which is simply just the announcements of Zoom etiquette, and then we'll talk about the schedule for the day. I'm Dina Brewster. I'm the Executive Director at Connecticut NOFA and the OLC program. We have a long day in front of us, or a full schedule, but a few announcements at the beginning is that this is a recorded Zoom session, so be aware that that is happening. And we ask that everybody is muted throughout the full day. At the happy half hour, which will start at 5 o'clock, we will allow everyone to unmute themselves and we can have a more gregarious exchange, but for now you are all muted. If there are questions that arrive, please put them in the chat. You can see that button in the bottom center of your screen. And if you are looking for deep credits, Jeremy will talk to you about that a little bit when he gives his introduction. But just a few notes. I was so excited to gather everyone today, and I wanted to open with a few thoughts about where the OLC program has been in what has been a pretty trying year, I think, for all of us, but also where we are going. From my seat as both a farmer and now newly a nonprofit manager, it feels palpably like the OLC star is rising. In the last year, it has felt like we are a snowball rolling downhill. We just keep getting bigger and gathering more partners and more enthusiasm. This is a really important moment for us to be doing this work and for you to be doing this work. One of the things that has been extraordinary for me in joining this community has been the power of the network that is created among AOLCPs and through the OLC program. Jeremy and Monique will talk to you about the ways in which that program has grown this year. But it does feel like every week there is another partner, another like-minded person. We have a local, a national, and a global movement now afoot. And we are so excited to be on the leading edge of innovation in that field. The other thing that has been really heartening that I also wanted to mention for those of you who are joining us for maybe your 5th or 6th or 8th year, or maybe even longer for this program and these annual gatherings, is built off the sense of the power of this network as well. Our goal in the last year has been to really support Jeremy. Many of you have probably seen in the last couple of years that Jeremy has been single-handedly holding this program together, and I am pleased to announce that he is now well flanked by some wonderful people who have joined this program, and they will be introducing themselves today as well. Monique Bosch and Sephra Alexandra Levin, you'll meet them throughout the day. We will also see, I think, with the program that we have established, the extent to which the Organic Land Care program sits now at the intersection of some very interesting work, both around policy initiatives that you will hear about from Troy, and also around ecological restoration, which you will hear from Ed Toth. But even more so, I think, and one of the reasons I'm so excited that Chip Osborne is starting off the day, is that we are also in a new era, or in uncharted land, I think, for many of us who have been in this work for a long time. We find that the world has changed in the last year. And we are excited to see and think about the ways in which our work together can change, and ways in which we can draw on the strength of that network to build a stronger planet and a stronger community in the next years ahead. I will turn it over to Jeremy, who will, I think, give us some sort of updates on the year, and then he will introduce Monique. And then we will get off and running with our speakers, who are the folks you have come here to see. So if you want on your screen as well, just for ease throughout the day, to hit the little button on the top, it should be on the top right corner of your screen that says speaker view. That will allow you also to kind of focus on those who are front and center, and you can of course choose to turn your screen on or off throughout the day. That I think, Jeremy, if I'm right, I think they do have the ability to do that. Okay, perfect. So again, welcome everybody, and Jeremy, take it away.
Thanks, Dina. Hello, everyone. It's nice to see so many familiar faces, and for those with their cameras off, I recognize a lot of these names, so welcome. Nice to see you as well. 2020 has been an interesting year for NOFA and for everyone, I'm sure. However, there are a lot of good updates from the NOFA Organic Land Care program that I'd like to share with you. So the first and foremost, this switch to online education. COVID has sped up that process, but it's been something we've been wanting to do for years and years. So, I hesitate to use the word opportunity, but it did provide the vehicle for getting education online and getting the Organic Land Care program online. We were able to offer 2 trainings online in 2020 with, record number of students attending, because we were able to reach far and wide outside of New England. With in-person courses, it was really geographically difficult for people to join us from outside of New England in the Northeast. So, in 2020, we trained over 200 landscapers. We have over 200 new AOLCPs, accredited organic land care professionals, that we trained over the course of 4 trainings, 2 live trainings early in the year, 1 in upstate New York and 1 in Massachusetts, and then 2 online courses. So over the course of the year, we now have over 700 AOLCPs in 25 different states, which now include Hawaii, but also Washington, D.C. and the U.S. Virgin Islands. So we are really excited about expanding our reach with online education and being able to reach people in the West Coast and in the outlying islands of the United States. So that's really, really exciting. We started a few new initiatives this year as well, one being soil health and microscopy. It's an initiative we started with advanced workshops led by Monique Bosch, who you'll hear from in a minute. So look for more of that in 2021. One thing we also started this year, or expanded upon, I should say, is stormwater management. With so much of the Northeast and the country being in drought constantly, especially this year, we sort of wanted to start the initiative of more stormwater education. And for the first time, we offered what's called the NGICP course. It's the National Green Infrastructure Certification Program. And that course is by WEF, which is the Water Environment Federation. And that was led by Trevor Smith. So he's actually doing that right now. It ends this month. And so that gives credentials to people, to land care professionals, to install, maintain, and design stormwater infrastructure. And so we're going to continue that work into 2020. Another really exciting project that we're doing here in the Northeast that continues to grow and continues to have grown in 2020 is called the Ecotype Project. And what that project did is our aim is to increase the number of native plants growing in our region. And to do this, we are growing out seed crops of Connecticut's native pollinator plants. We wild collect the seeds from open spaces, grow them in living seed banks, and then bring them to our nursery growers, who then sell them to homeowners so that we can produce the plants to restore native pollinator habitat across Connecticut and across the region. And to date, we've produced over 1 million seeds across 25 living seed banks in the state. So that's really exciting work that we're doing. And you can read more about that on ctnofa.org and look for updates as well throughout the year. Lastly, I wanted to talk about the search site. We launched a new search site for AOLCPs, and it's where customers can search for organic services by state, county, and city. It's a new site. An updated site, I should say, and we're excited to continue to expand this website in 2021 and make it even better and with more and more AOLCPs in 2021. And we want to promote you as much as possible, the AOLCPs and your services. So please check out that site. It's at guide.ctnofa.org. I'll put it in the chat as well. And lastly, I wanted to thank everyone here today and all the AOLCPs who support this program, especially in 2020. We were really concerned about what's going to happen with everyone's concerned about what was going to happen in 2020. And each and every one of you, the AOLCPs, prove that you support this organization, you support this program by renewing your accreditation, by keeping in constant contact. Many of you donated. So I wanted to thank every one of you AOLCPs who continue to support the program and the work that we're doing every year. It really isn't, we aren't a program without the AOLCPs and without your support every single year. So thank you for that. That's my update for 2020. I'm going to kick it over to Monique Bosch, who's going to talk about sort of what to look forward to in 2021. Monique, you there?
Oh, yeah. Can you hear me? Thumbs up. All right. Yes. So what will OLC look like in 2021? Well, we do plan to continue with our virtual accreditation courses, with the next course being offered in February. We'd always enjoyed meeting in person, but being able to offer this course online has been a game changer. So in 2021, we'll be able to offer the course at a reduced rate since our overhead is lower, and people from across the country, as Dina had mentioned, and beyond can tune in. And we have recordings of the presentations that can be viewed anytime, anywhere. So you can view it again, and it's a wonderful archive for you to have. Taking this to the next level, we plan to offer more interaction between teacher and student, as well as adding virtual on-site visits via videos to take us beyond the classroom into the fields and landscapes that we are teaching about. One feature we plan to include with our virtual courses this year is the opportunity for land care professionals from around the country to share best practices and compare notes. So we at NOFA think that there is much to share between regions, and as we meet to discuss particular topics, we will offer a shared platform where participants can join in to talk about their experiences, the lessons they've learned from their particular geographic location. Also new, starting with the February accreditation course, is the opportunity for all participants in the course to meet up for a debrief session after the exam and after the practical project has been submitted. And this will give everyone an opportunity to offer feedback about the course, go over the practical submissions, and find out how they did on those, and be able to show it to each other. And we'll have, if they have any other questions, to get answered. NOFA also plans to increase the number of virtual advanced workshops through 2021, and we look for your input if you have suggestions for any advanced workshops that you would find interesting. AOLCPs are encouraged to attend these virtual workshops because you'll earn credit to apply for reaccreditation. They will delve into various specialties, offering those interested more in-depth information on their subject of interest, or an opportunity to learn a new skill or method of working, which they can then offer their clients. So some topics we came up with are, for example, pollinator gardens and characteristics of native plants, including rare and unusual species, seed saving, storing and starting, rain gardens, similar to the stormwater, but we would focus on rain gardens with the stormwater advanced course that we are offered this year, which will include the landscape design part and plant diversity. Another interesting track would be incorporating permaculture design principles. So food forests, working with contours, guilds, and also perhaps natural turf for all purposes is what you're interested in, where we take everything from playing fields, lawn, diversity, and go in further than what we do in the overall course that we offer. Another thing that we're interested in are these quiet communities. We can train and offer solutions to switch to electric machines, what the investment is like and how to make that transition. Urban land care was another, and the final one, which I'm really excited about, is homesteading for the suburban homeowner. So in 2021, NOFA will be also, this is also very exciting for me, in the planning stages to offer an organic land care course for college level students. The course would train students to become natural resource professionals. So working and to act as stewards of the land, to protect and respond to our changing environment. Students will have the opportunity to learn from professionals as well as intern on various farms, on private and municipal land, and also work with nonprofits focusing on community food solutions. So new tracks will be available in 2021, allowing those taking the general OLC course to select specific subjects of interest. These tracks would offer in-depth learning on a number of topics to broaden the scope of the course and add specialties that participants may choose to add to their business model. So we see the industry changing, and we recognize the emerging markets that we want to be ready to be able to offer and grow and learn together on. And so we want to be able to offer the skills and information you need to do that. We recognize the value of the network that is created among AOLCPs. That's why we are meeting today at this annual gathering and have included a happy half hour at the end of the day. The reason we ask you to reaccredit every year is so that we can all stay connected and continue to be part of this vital, important movement. So not knowing what 2021 holds in store, we do hope that we can use the tools we've learned in 2020 to push us to new ways of sharing knowledge, experience, and journeys. It is the tough times that often create the most positive change, as we realize our ability to be resilient, flexible, and connected. So these are the tools that we think will get us through. So in 2021, we want to open up the conversation to include all of us who are change makers, advocates for the earth, who want to be part of the change that is so vital to the health of the planet and all of us who belong to it. That sounded kind of preachy. Anyway, the good news is that's the end. So take it away, Jeremy.
Thanks, Monique. Two last quick things before I introduce Chip Osborne, who's our first speaker. If you are looking for Connecticut DEEP credits, please message me in the chat and just state your name and that you are looking for credits. And then I will follow up with you about your pesticide applicator number. If you are out from outside of Connecticut, generally the New England states accept credits from other New England states. So if you're from, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, Maine, Vermont, please message me as well. And those environmental departments usually take Connecticut credits as well. So with that being said, I'm going to introduce someone who doesn't need an introduction, but I'm going to do it anyway. Chip Osborne, our first speaker today, has been a powerhouse with the organic land care program over the last 20 years. He's helped this program grow to what it is today, and he has offered countless hours of instruction and advising and really getting this program to where it is today. So to give him sort of a formal introduction, Chip Osborne is the president of Osborne Organics and the founder of the Organic Landscape Association, which he can talk to you about. He has over 10 years of experience in creating safe, sustainable, and healthy athletic fields and landscapes through natural turf management, and 35 years experience as a professional horticulturalist. As a wholesale and retail nurseryman, he has a firsthand experience with pesticides, herbicides, and fungicides routinely used in the landscapes and horticultural industry. Personal experience has led him to believe that there must be a safer way to grow plants. His personal investigation, the study of conventional and organic soil science practices, and his hands-on experimentation led him to become one of the country's leading experts on growing sustainable natural turf. And his work has taken him across the country, from Hawaii to California to the Midwest, the Southwest, and here in New England. I often joke that California's foremost leading expert in organic turf lives in Marblehead, Massachusetts, because of his work out there in promoting organic land care. So Chip, without further ado, I'm going to unmute you, and please feel free to take it away.
All right, Jeremy. Well, thank you for the kind words. And sitting here, I realize I really am getting old, because it's now 45 years in the industry and 20 years in organic turf. So I just added 10 years to my life. So that's good to remember what it was back then. So good afternoon, everybody. And a lot of you I know, some of you I don't. Jeremy gave you my rough background. And as you mentioned, I've been in horticulture for all those years. And for half of it, it was from the conventional perspective. I was taught in the early 1970s that I had to spray to run my commercial nursery and greenhouse operation. And I did it for almost 20 years. And, you know, when I look back and think about it, that when I started doing that, pesticides were only 20, 25 years old. So much they didn't know. And we had it, we bought it. And then they find out it comes to market and all of a sudden, oh, there's a big problem with it. You know, the sad thing is we're here in 2020 and the same thing still happens, right? There's a reason that we are organic land care professionals, because there's something wrong with the model that we were taught back in the day. And when you look at pesticides, and when they came into the marketplace in the 1950s, it was to sell product. It's all about money. Somebody came up with something to kill weeds and an ammonium nitrate to stimulate plants. And how can we make money on it? And our expectations for the landscapes, not ours as organic professionals, but the expectations the general public has for landscapes was created by an industry to sell product. The no clover, all of that kind of stuff, it's a good guy. But now all of a sudden it's a bad guy because they had something to kill it. So I decided that I was tired of following that path. Personal things that happened, but led me to believe that there was a real issue with these things. So I began my organic career back in 1997 and immediately became an advocate. I turned on my own industry, and this isn't the right way to do things. But at that time, I broadened my horticultural specialty to turf and the landscape, because I knew out there in the landscape that if I was doing this in my business, all these people that are going to their garden centers and buying things and not educated, putting it in their backyards, huge pesticide problem, more than the industry actually. And that was my driving focus. So where are we here today as AOLCPs? I can tell you with certainty that organic land care nationally began right here in this room. It began here in the Northeast and spread elsewhere. There's absolutely no question about that. And everybody around the country acknowledges that that's in fact the way it was. So I was working down in Westchester County and Long Island with a group called Grassroots Environmental Education, and working to develop organic lawn and turf strategies in Eastern Massachusetts. I was training landscape professionals early on and worked in the municipal side of things. And there was a group working in Connecticut and Massachusetts. This Connecticut and Massachusetts group developed the Connecticut NOFA program, Organic Land Care, and wrote the standards for organic land care. Standards that are referenced nationally because they are the real deal and they are the ones. Some names that you all should know. You may not know them personally, but Kim Stoner, Bill Dusing, Mary Terrell, Camilla Warden, Dwight Brooks, Priscilla Williams, Don Bishop, Todd Harrington, Sarah Little, Marilyn Castriata, and last but not least, and someone you all know that's sitting in this room today, Mike Nadeau. And that group of people got together and did all of that. They laid the foundation in the early 2000s for what we have now. And the first course was offered in 2002, and I was lucky enough to take it in 2003. We joined forces in 2004, and I became deeply involved with Connecticut NOFA because I knew that it was the real deal. And this was the model that everybody had to follow if they truly wanted to manage a landscape, manage landscape naturally. So here we are in 2020. I have to give a tip of my cap to Dina and to Jeremy for all of their hard work. Monique, that's coming into the program, that's going to take it all to the next level. The things that Monique was talking to you about are going to chart the future for our group and going into new territory. But Dina's guidance and taking it in the direction that she is, and then Jeremy, I mean, you can't say enough about Jeremy. You all know Jeremy. He works tirelessly. He worked over the years when it was tough a few years ago, and he stuck to it and he held the course and he got us to where we are today. So Jeremy, thanks to you. So let's talk a little bit about who we are. Organic land care has two sides. There's the advocate side And we have advocates now that are taking our course. They're not professionals in the industry. There's a woman sitting in tonight, a couple that are advocates that took this course because they wanted to know more about organic land care so that they could bring that to the general public. And then there's our side of the industry, the practitioner side of the industry. So we're the professionals that actually do the implementation. But make no mistake, as practitioners, we benefit directly from the work of advocacy. It is the advocacy that changes the marketplace for us. And we are here to be able to respond to that. Portland, Maine, a perfect example of where advocacy over several years resulted in ordinances. Troy Moon is going to speak after me. Troy was deeply involved in that, not as an advocate, but as a sustainability coordinator for the city of Portland. But that ordinance prohibited the use of pesticides on public and private land. I got involved in testifying before City Council. We encouraged the reference to the organic land care standards. South Portland directly references our standards as the model for what should happen in that city moving forward. Landscape contractors now had to know how to perform organic landscaping services. So Jeremy took the course to Portland on request 2 years ago, and it's been wildly successful. So that's the perfect model, right? An advocate gets policy changed, institutionalizes practices, creates huge market opportunity for a regional group of landscape contractors, and then OLC steps in and teaches them the right way to do it. So different perspectives that people bring to from advocacy for organic land management. Pollinators, we've heard a little bit about that already. The Roundup issue, all of you I'm sure have heard about the court cases and the huge settlements at every single time Monsanto or now Bayer loses. Because the evidence is there. It's known now that 40 years ago, they knew all along that these things were going to happen, and it got swept under the rug, and it's all come to light. Public health issues, children's health. Children's health issues are a big deal. Think of our federal government. 3 years ago, chlorpyrifos is an insecticide that's known to cause cancer in children. One of the few that they can make a direct link from the chemical to the kid. It was supposed to sunset out. And 3 years ago, the administration, with a stroke of the pen, put it back in the marketplace because it allowed a cheaper alternative. So we're at a point now where government is putting cancer-causing chemicals back into the environment, back into agriculture. Science tells us there's a link between these exposures and illnesses. So, you know, at this point, the debate about whether a pesticide is good or bad is a moot point. Because we don't need pesticides, right? Because organic land care works. We know that. Other people are learning that. The debate about pesticides, when I testify in hearings, that's my point. This whole pesticide discussion is secondary to the fact that organic land care works. The general public is becoming aware. They may not have been before. Certainly there are deniers. All of us in the organic side of the industry bump into people all the time that tell us organic doesn't work. But just like COVID, which has its deniers, there's enough science to support that organic land management is the real deal. It is the viable alternative. So what's happening around the country? Advocacy groups, a little bit of an example. Beyond Pesticides. Beyond Pesticides is the world's leading advocacy group for the reduction and elimination of pesticides in both agriculture and land management. I'm on their board of directors and have been working with them for 15 years and have developed programs where we go into cities and towns around the country and teach organic land care projects by developing a pilot project to show people that it works. Beyond Pesticides was originally founded with pesticides in agriculture. And now the main focus of that nonprofit is to make organic land care the national standard. Is to be able to do that, to stand up to the industry and push back and say, we're teaching people in a way to manage in a non-chemical framework. Toxic Use Reduction Institute here in Massachusetts, Tory has been working for over 20 years to reduce all kinds of environmental toxins. But 15 years ago, they made a commitment to take a strong stand on organic land care and have been tireless promoters of that. Portland Protectors is the advocacy group in Portland that was largely responsible for that ordinance. Protect South Portland, another advocacy group, they got the first ordinance. The Organic Land Care Project is a group, a national group that is headed by a group of women that have put together an incredible resource on sort of like a teaching kit for the advocate and getting the advocate up to speed on what is happening. Non-toxic communities. Diana Carpinoni, a tremendous resource, has spent tireless hours. I invite you all to go look at her website, Non-Toxic Communities, where she is really leading the country and bringing people from the country all together on this. So what we're seeing now is a blend of advocacy and our work in the professional industry. So our industry benefits directly from all of these people's work. So it is what their work is and what they do with the average citizen, which could potentially lead into government, is all a benefit for us. So it's in our best interest as an industry to encourage this. We want to work hand in hand with advocacy. I've long believed that Connecticut NOFA should get more directly involved in that kind of work, because it's only building business or building resources for ourselves and our organization. So as the organic landscaper or the organic land care professional, we're not necessarily out there making policy changes and changing the dynamic. The advocate's doing that. We're in the business of managing organic landscapes. But if we as professionals choose to get involved, that lends credibility to the discussion. I can tell you for sure, anytime I've shared a platform with an advocate, the advocate's words are taken more seriously because there is an organic land care professional there that can speak to what happens when we manage in this framework. So as much as any of us would like to get involved or wants to get involved, we should. The advocate's mission is to reduce and eliminate toxic pesticides and replace them with organic land care. So 20 years ago, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, lots of advocates did lots of great work. But the advocacy at that time was for the reduction and the elimination of pesticides. We've changed, we've turned a corner. Now, the advocacy is tying the reduction and elimination of pesticides with replacement with organic land care. And that's a big deal. And that's because of us. That's because of everybody in this room, and certainly others around the country, and our fellow AOLCPs, and a lot of people that aren't AOLCPs. But the idea that an advocate is out there, not just talking about getting rid of pesticides, but talking about replacing it with organic land care. And again, that wouldn't happen if it wasn't for Mike and Priscilla and all the people that that went before to get us to this point. Advocates work at the local level. They make the community aware of the issue of toxic pesticides. Then ultimately, as Troy's going to tell you, work with local governments. In some cases, policy and regulation happens from the top down because a city councilor or somebody on city staff is aware of this issue and brings it up. Other times it is the advocate who attempts to influence or works to influence decision makers. I'm going to take a couple of minutes because one of the things I want you all to leave here today to realize how much is going on nationally. And, I know when we're here in New England, we're in this 20-year organic framework, and, we have our networks and all that. But I don't think a lot of people realize the impact that's happened overall. So I'm going to read you some cities, and you're going to recognize a lot. Southern California alone: Burbank, Carlsbad, Costa Mesa, Ensenadas, Greenfield, Irvine, Laguna Beach, Laguna Hills, Los Angeles, Malibu, Manhattan Beach, San Clemente, San Diego County, San Juan Capistrano, Santa Barbara, Lotus Island, and various homeowner associations. And out there, an HOA, I work with an HOA that has 20,000 residents. All of those cities are at some stage of talking about organic land care or policy. University of California, university system, 10 colleges, Roundup is banned on all 10. I'm going to tell you in a little bit how that happened. University of California, Berkeley, I worked with them. We developed a pilot program 2.5 years ago, wildly successful. It was no big deal. From our perspective, it was really common sense, organic thinking, no fancy products, no bells and whistles, but it was just teaching the right way to do things. And we took their gathering spot, their common area, outdoor grass that had been horrible for years, and turned it around by feeding the soil. That's all we did, is pulled away synthetics and began to feed the soil, and then taught them how to integrate cultural practices with grass seed. So, we not only replaced the chemicals, but we improved that pilot site. Northern California, same thing. Marin County, Richmond, Santa Rosa, Sonoma County, Watsonville, Woodland. Colorado, University of Colorado Boulder, the entire campus has been chemical pesticide free for 6 years. They've been working on it for 10. And then 4 or 5 years ago, they finally did a release. We made it. It took us 5 years to transition the entire campus. I worked with them 10 years ago. The seed was planted. They invited me. I didn't go to them. And they just had the desire and they took it to that level. Boulder, Colorado, Longmont, Englewood, discussions beginning in Denver, Florida, Miami, North Miami, South Miami, 3 others. Hawaii County, the Big Island, Maui County, Kauai County, projects on all of those going full bore organic land management. Illinois, Chicago Park District, Evanston, 3 others. In Maine, 30 cities and towns in Maine have got some kind of pesticide language in their city. South Portland and Portland, the leading examples. Maryland, Montgomery County, a county of 1 million people, no pesticides. Baltimore, Tacoma Park, Gaithersburg, Massachusetts, Rose Fitzgerald Kennedy Greenway, Cambridge, Springfield, 4 more. New Hampshire, Dover and Portsmouth, Minnesota, Rochester, Minneapolis School and Park District, trying out organic for the first time. Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, both have pilot projects. 3 cities plus Cuyahoga County in Ohio, 3 cities plus Eugene in Oregon. So all of these cities are committed to leading by example as part of their learning about organic land care, because it's their goal to educate residents. So that's only a fraction of the list, because I didn't want to bore you with more names, but I want everybody to understand that this is such a huge presence nationally. So what does that all translate to? It translates to a national market opportunity. So there's a lot going on in cities and towns around the country, and in every one of those cities, the demand for organic land care practitioners is growing. The demand for easy accessibility of organic product is growing. A market opportunity is being created. Believe it or not, I go into parts of the country, I can't buy organic fertilizer. I can't find an organic practitioner to work on a sports field. They just are not there, because the big companies that have that ability have yet to embrace organic. So that's where the work is, to bring all of them to the table. I think everybody in this room realizes you can't be an organic practitioner just by swapping out product. You can't say, I'm going to put that stuff away and I'm going to buy a bag of organic fertilizer and I'm your local landscape guy. I'm organic and I'm going to do it for you. I think we all know that that's not what's going to work. It is all of you as AOLCPs, all the time that you've invested in education. All of that allows you to excel in the industry. And every time I teach, I talk about the biggest difference between organic land care practitioners and a regular conventional landscaper is because we are all educated. And unfortunately, on the other side of the industry, if you can afford a pickup truck, a rake, and a lawnmower, you can be a landscaper tomorrow. And you may or may not have any education. Now, there's a lot of conventional folks that have great education in horticulture and chemical intensive management. But by and large, what we see out there driving around in a truck does not. So that's what makes you all different. It's just not changing the name on your truck. It's not buying that different bag of fertilizer. So now that all these market opportunities are here, and we heard about Monique talking about how she, envisions the demand nationally around the country, and she's spot on with that. Now we have to keep our eyes open for greenwashing. Because now that this organic land management is growing so dramatically around the country, there's a potential for money to be made. Anytime a potential for money to be made sits on the horizon, somebody's going to likely go to try to grab a piece of it. So we have to be on our toes to distinguish ourselves from those trying to greenwash. And greenwash is not only happening at the product level, but it's happening at the practitioner and consulting levels. Claims are being made that simply cannot be supported. And so that is not good for us, because people are going out and pretending, I'll say pretending because they're the pretenders, they're what I call the fakers. And they're out there talking about organic, and it's a less than 50-50 bet that they're going to be successful, but they're going to, their failures will give a black eye to all of us. So your education, again, I can't stress enough, your education as an AOLCP is what makes the difference. Let's talk a little bit about product and how spoiled we are here in the Northeast. We are incredibly spoiled on the East Coast. We can get anything we want for product. You can get all your grass seeds, you can get your choice of organic fertilizer, choice of soil amendments from multiple sources, choice of, availability of technical support, regional availability for continuing education. We have it all here. We take that for granted because it is just so easy. We have the best organic products and availability in the country. West of the Mississippi is an entirely different situation. Sourcing organic product becomes extremely difficult. In many cases, something we might pay $30 for a 50-pound bag of fertilizer on the East Coast is $45 in other parts of the country, and it's the same basic stuff. I can't get what I want for my projects. As Jeremy referenced, I work nationally as a consultant. I can't buy a good bag of organic fertilizer in Southern California. Nobody sells it. I can get cow manure in Colorado, and that's it. Spokane, Washington couldn't even find me one bag of organic fertilizer. So when you start looking at that kind of a situation, Chicago and Minnesota and up in that way, turkey manure, and that's about it. They don't have the soy and the feather meal and all the things that we do. So product sort, that's one of the things that needs to happen, is to increase the availability of affordable organic soil amendments and fertility products. We all know that everything we do is really a feed the soil approach. And that's the biggest educational hurdle that we have, is we try to get people to say, look, you're not feeding the plant. There's no food in that bag of fertilizer. You are simply using something that's a catalyst that works as part of a microbial system. It works as part of a big system. So at some point, we're looking to, I've never really wanted to get involved in the product side of the industry, but it's so frustrating when you have to tell somebody that if we were buying fertilizer here for $1,100 a ton, in some other region of the country, it's going to be $1,800. Or they can't easily get those soil amendments that we're used to. So that is going to be a key focus over the next 2 or 3 years, is to get affordable accessibility to product. Let's switch gears a little bit and take a couple minutes and look at how COVID has affected the industry. Hopefully, you and all of you in the room were not significantly negatively impacted by COVID. I'm guessing that some of you may have had to change your business strategies. You may have had to juggle or do things. In my experience around the country, in most states, I've gone from 35 or 40 airplane flights a year to 0. So on March 8th, I called Boulder, Colorado and said, I'm not comfortable flying out tomorrow. We're going to have to hook this up as a Zoom, and I'm going to do it remotely. And I'm on Zoom now 3 or 4 times a week or more every single week. And that's replaced all the in-person, consultation. And we're doing it with photography, with video, with soil testing. So in most states, landscape-related businesses were determined essential use and were allowed to still conduct business. In some areas, crew size was restricted. In some areas, the number of people on a property at a time was restricted. Martha's Vineyard, once they opened it back up, they actually shut down landscape contractors, and then they opened it back up in early May, and only two people could go on a property at a time. So, that was an impact on how they did their business. In other places, no restriction at all. Most wholesale nurseries did pretty well. I had one guy in a retail nursery said, boy, I wish they had a pandemic every year. Business has never been so good. What a horrible thing to say, but he's that kind of businessman. But, the idea that, there was good response. Most places that sell to do-it-yourself homeowners did well once people could get out and get back and shop because they were spending all their time at home. Most landscape contractors, once they got busy, got into full swing, and many had the work that they had anticipated they would get. Some things fell through, and then some things got added, as always happens. Municipalities didn't fare so well. I do a lot of work in the municipal sector. Products, so any product suppliers, fertilizer distributors, product people that had sales in volume sales to municipalities saw big losses of revenue. So revenue that was there in 2019 just disappeared in 2020. I had probably 40% of the cities I'm working with did nothing, suspended all operations because their manpower was severely impacted. You couldn't run full crews. It was 4 guys on Tuesday, 3 on Wednesday, 4 back on Thursday, and so forth. Split crews, because if one got sick, the whole crew would go into quarantine. So a lot of furloughs, a lot of frozen budgets, because COVID added expense in other areas of the municipality. Budgets for land management were frozen. They were uncertain about future revenues. I know municipalities that lost over $800,000 to $1 million in recreation revenue, and the recreation revenue funded their management programs for horticulture. Extra burdens on sanitation protocols took money from existing fertilizer, grass seed budgets, and manpower. I know of one municipality in Oregon that once this happened in April, they stopped irrigating. They let every blade of grass in the city go dormant, cool season grass, because they didn't have the men to cut it and they didn't have any money to fertilize it. So they just let it go to sleep for 6 months. And when it rained at some point, when the rain came back, the grass came back. So it was really tough going in the public sector, probably tough for anybody as a service provider or product salesperson that depended on the public sector. So there was the sort of the hit and then the benefit. So different fractions of the industry did better than others. So as it approached the different segments, everybody's expecting to recover. I know all the public sector work and these folks, when they get back, they're looking forward to 2021. And I think all of us in the landscape industry are, looking forward to just putting the extra, sort of the extra hassles, the extra things we've had to go through you know, in 2020. Some of you, instead of a face-to-face with a client, you might have done it on a platform like we're doing today and had that initial discussion with a client. It's a new way of doing things, but if you have done that, you probably found that it worked pretty well. So now let's switch gears again and talk about what's happening big time in the organic land care industry. Corporations are stepping up. Corporate interests are stepping forward and saying enough with chemicals. We want to promote organic land care. Stonyfield Organic, Stonyfield Yogurt. Most of you probably are familiar with that. They have spent and are committed to spend over $850,000 over 3 years to bring organic land care to 35 cities around the country. They're giving each city a $5,000 cash grant, and then they're paying for technical consulting services so that the municipality can do a pilot project, learn how to do organic land care on public space, either athletic field or a passive park, teach the community how to do it as well, with the end goal of significant pesticide reduction over time in the city. So that started 3 years ago, and that was 2 years ago, three. And so that's a pretty big deal, you know, to have a national corporation. Then now we have Natural Grocers. Natural Grocers is a grocery store chain that is in 15 states west of the Mississippi. They have raised $150,000 for the same thing, to teach 10 individual cities how to go organic. They've committed to another $150,000 over the next 12 to 18 months. So we have those two. So between that, imagine that's could be potentially $500,000 being directed directly to cities and towns to teach them how to move away from pesticides. Beyond Pesticides has an internal project. I told you their focus was redirected to organic land care, and they're working probably as we speak in 15 cities and towns. So between all of this, we're looking at about 45 cities and towns, major, you know, some large, some small, but all being introduced to organic land care. That is a project or groups of projects that are, you know, look to go on, hopefully indefinitely into the future. Successes. We've all had our successes in organic land care. And, you know, I encourage all of you, and maybe, you know, within our group somehow, you know, between Dina, Jeremy, Monique, we could collect a bunch of real success stories, because that's what people want to hear. When I go to testify before a state legislature, they want to know about a success. They want to say, show me somewhere it was done. Show me that it cost less money over time. Show me that you can reduce water over time. All things that we know happen when we embrace organic land management. So I encourage all of you, and if, you know, if Jeremy's up for it and collecting some success stories, it will be a wonderful body of information to have, because that really is one of the clinchers when we're talking about organic land care, is being able to point to something. You know, I'll mention that, you know, of the ones I do. Pepperdine University in Malibu, I've been working with them for 3 years and under contract for the next 3, and working on their NCAA Division I soccer field. And everybody's happy. Everybody's thrilled with the way it's going. And they're looking to, you know, eliminate Roundup on campus, go with alternatives, go with mechanical, go with, hopefully we get them into a steam weeder. Different things like that, moving through campus, trees, pulling synthetics off of an 80-year-old heirloom ficus tree, which is, you know, it grows out there, and they just were dumping synthetic after synthetic after synthetic on it, and it was in trouble. So all we did was scrape off all the bark mulch and put compost in there, nothing else. And then put the bark mulch back. And in 9 months, the tree started to turn around and started to shoot all this new growth, and everybody was amazed. And so the idea that it's just going back to basics. Right here in New England, in New Hampshire, Manchester, New Hampshire, the Fisher Cats, professional baseball, AA affiliate of the Toronto Blue Jays, have been organic since August of 2019. The president of the ball club, everyone is over the top thrilled about the quality of the field. Major League Baseball called and said, what do you do about weeds? There has not been a weed on that field in a year and a half. Because it's really not about that. You have to get beyond weeds. And that whole program, if I could describe to you how that program goes, it's 3 words, or four, beyond NPK. We're not just opening bags and throwing stuff out there. We're feeding them, that's 98.6% sand, but we feed the microbes every 3 weeks. Every 3 weeks, we feed the microbes. And that's nitrogen in a professional baseball stadium. They're typically putting down between 4 and 6 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet a year. We put down barely 1.5. And it was all about stimulating the soil. Colorado, Boulder Housing Partners, Boulder, Colorado, low-income housing. They decided they were tired of exposing residents. We've been working with them for a year and a half. Everybody's happy. Everybody likes what's going. They're talking about expanding it from the pilot sites to the whole city. And then this fellow out there is so charged up, he wants to go to affordable housing nationally and say there is no reason to have a pesticide where people live in close proximity to each other. And there are groups now ready to back that financially to train representatives of these different affordable housing, groups. So where does that, where does that leave us? We need to, Jay Feldman, the executive director of Beyond Pesticides, we were talking 3 or 4 weeks ago, and he came up with this phrase that kind of says it all for what we do: embrace systemic change. That's what we need to do. So when we talk about managing, right, when we're managing our landscapes, we're managing in a systems-based manner. We're not focusing on the plant, but we're focusing equally on the plant and the soil and everything organic product, and then all of our cultural practices, and bringing that into an overall rounded out program that is a systems-based approach. So it makes sense that if that's what works in the landscape, we really need to embrace systemic change. And I think this is what we want. This is what we want, to change the industry and bring that huge industry over to our side of the table. So that's what we're working towards, whether we're an advocate or whether we're we are professionals in the industry. Anything, it touches all of us, the decision makers, the folks that work in all the cities and towns, all of us as practitioners, all of the advocates, the homeowners, and our industry as a whole. So we're all working towards making change. I can tell you that the time is now. Jay and I have talked at length, and we honestly believe that we're in a window of 5 years where if we do things right, we can take this discussion and cement it permanently. Because it's not enough to talk about it and have it come and go. It has to be institutionalized. We have to institutionalize the practices that we are in a very receptive. People are out there. They want what we have. They want the education that, the OLC program can provide. They want those standards nationally to be able to say, this is what we should be doing. So we have traction. We have ability to move and make change. And we honestly believe that in the next 5 years, we've seen so much change in the last 5. The next 5, I can just see it steamrolling. So our industry is growing, and that's a good thing for all of us, right? More market opportunity. So let me tell you a little story about how fast things can happen and how excited people are in this discussion of organic land care. Young lady, her name is Mackenzie Feldman. She's a student at Berkeley. And I met Mackenzie when she was a sophomore, junior. And she, as a 19-year-old, decided that pesticides weren't a good thing. And she worked and rallied a bunch of students and formed a group, Herbicide Free Berkeley. And she went right to the top to the decision makers and said, we don't want pesticides on campus anymore. We want to learn how to do it organically. And so she reached out to Beyond Pesticides, and we went in and met with her, and that's where the project on the campus of Berkeley originated. So her engagement with decision makers, her engagement with students made the difference. So now she has graduated and she has gone on to found a nonprofit called Herbicide Free Campus, where she is trying to outreach every single college campus in the country. She has students. She's actually received, she's a nonprofit. She's brought in $75,000, $80,000, $90,000 in grant money in the last year to hire students to help her in campuses all around the country. And I'm working with her to create a set of standards, right? Sort of drawing from the NOFA standards on what it might look like for a campus to call themselves organic. And what would the employees, or what would the turf crew, or what would the horticulturists, the gardeners on the campus have to do to be organic? So it's going to be pretty, it's going to be pretty strict. And you're not going to get in there and say it if you're not doing the real deal. So that's the kind of an effort that makes systemic change. And imagine that, a 19-year-old girl, ended up starting that. So where do we go from here? What does the future hold for us? Climate action plans, right? We all know that cities and towns all over the country are developing a climate action plan. Our organic land care strategies are being directly tied to climate action plan. What we do organically makes a positive benefit. So a city and town, cities and towns are incorporating organic land management strategies in climate action plans, knowing that is what can happen. Carbon sequestration. How does organic land care fit into that piece of the puzzle? Looking at the carbon footprint of conventional products and practices is huge. So just eliminating conventional products improves the carbon footprint dramatically. I've actually gotten to a point where I'm doing soil tests now, and I'm measuring soluble organic carbon in soils. So, we all know the process of, we all know that our fertilizers aren't plant food, right? They're just catalysts. So in the process of photosynthesis, sun's energy, presence of moisture, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere enters in through stomata, chemical reaction with chlorophyll, sugars, amino acids, carbohydrates are produced. Paul Wagner, do you all remember from your time sitting with Paul Wagner when he told you that roughly 80% of all the carbohydrates produced in photosynthesis go to the root system? Half of that drives the root growth, and the other half, which is 40% of total carbohydrate production, becomes an exudate into the soil as an energy source for microbes, and that becomes sequestered carbon. So now we're embarking on a 5-year effort to try to show that long-term organic management will increase carbon being held in the soil. So we'll see what happens. That's the hypothesis, and we'll see where that goes. In the future, we need to unify our industry nationally, just like we have here in the Northeast. It's a very fragmented industry. The conventional industry, if nothing else, is extremely unified all the way through, from top to bottom, from from the guy that's in the laboratory mixing up the chemical cocktail to the guy that's out there and spraying it all over the landscapes and everybody in between. It's a unified industry. We are here in the Northeast. In the Northeast, this is a unified organic subset of the industry. But on the national level, we have advocates, practitioners, distributors, product manufacturers, product developers. Nothing really ties all that together. So we're operating on the principle, I think all of us as business people want as much business as we can get. But that comes from when a consumer, homeowner, changes their mind. Because most of us have already touched and reached all those folks that we know that I'll call them organically inclined. And even as AOLCPs, we have been teaching for the most part to the organically inclined. Now is the time to reach across and to bring in and to take our education to the chemical people, to the nozzle heads of the world, and bring them to the table to show them the same thing with the homeowner, getting them to begin to adopt practices. So that's where the advocate comes in. So tying our industry together from the advocate that stirs the pot and raises awareness, builds business for the practitioner gets busier, has more clients, buys more product from distributors do better, distributors sell more product from product manufacturers become more profitable, and that leads to the research and development and the product developers. So it's a chain that goes all the way up. And so trying to unify and bring that together. So right now, nothing really ties that together, but that is one of the big needs. Jeremy mentioned to you that I was the founder of the Organic Landscape Association, and that's true. And I have a bunch of folks, and Mike is a part of that. Mike has been part of that from day one. His expertise, and he will continue to be part of that as we develop into the next level. So a group of us have been working to develop the Organic Landscape Association. It's an organization that's membership based. It has membership categories from all of those groups that I mentioned, including students. The goal is to bring different groups together. In other words, to try to bring all people interested in the promotion of organic land management together and try to become more powerful as a common force. The Organic Landscape Association hopes to be the home for national organic education online, education that can be adapted to every region of the country, that can be adapted to the Southwest, the Southeast, the Northeast, the central heartland of the country, and the Pacific Northwest. Every one of those regions is a little bit different. Our standards were developed for the Northeast, and they're spot on perfect for the Northeast. Adjustments are needed to take that to regions of different regions of the country. So the Organic Landscape Association hopes in time, with funding, to be able to develop that kind of broad-based education. It would always be taught exactly the way you all were taught. That is the model that the original Organic Land Care Committee created is perfect. And if it's not broken, don't fix it. So that is the education that needs to be taken to everybody. The Organic Landscape Association will be working with another nonprofit to potentially certify landscapes. Just like in organic agriculture, farmland is certified. Well, we're looking to potentially certify landscapes. Also up for discussion is a land care version of OMRI, Organic Materials Review Institute, where it would certify products for organic land management. Because right now we take it as a default from OMRI. We are using default from agricultural product. And it's really time that our industry spoke to those products that may be unique to our industry, and not used in agriculture. So that is, a group is working on that. And then, developing a national set of standards. And ideally, it would love to be modeled on the standards for organic land care that the Organic Land Care Committee created, 2 decades ago. So we look at all of this as potentially being a vehicle to, to do this as time goes by. Again, thinking to the future, one of the things that we need to do is, and if there's any landscape architects on the call, I'm not picking on you, but from the landscape architectural design and build segment of the industry, most all of it is conventionally oriented. I just reviewed a landscape architect's design plan for a major city here in the Northeast, and they're saying that it's acceptable to put down 2% organic matter, soil with 2% organic matter. Imagine that. It's in black and white in the document specification that any soil is allowed as long as it meets a minimum requirement of 2% organic matter and conforms to a soil chemistry test. How stupid is that? It just makes absolutely no sense that we're still talking about that. So, we have to come to a point where we can spec soils that lend themselves to organic management, soil specifications that focus on soil health. Soil health can no longer be branded a fictitious term like it was 15 years ago. Soil health is the real deal. And honestly, in all my practice, there's not much attention paid to soils during construction. People don't embrace the concept of soil health. They're willing to put in that 2% organic matter. And I think everybody here in the room knows that 3% organic matter is the minimum for successful horticultural growth, as stated by almost every extension. So, the industry is out of step with that. Poor soil, I can tell you, poor soil can be easily managed with synthetics, water-soluble fertilizers, chemical pesticides. You can put grass seed out in the parking lot and put some water to it and some nitrogen, and you're going to grow grass. It's not going to be permanent, but you can do that. So synthetics can cut corners. Synthetics are the cheaters. Synthetics are the ones that can manage and everything. So you can have gravel and sand and 1% organic matter and manage it. I have projects where I have 1.9% organic matter, 1.6% organic matter, and I have to manage it organically. So think of humus. We all know humus is a fraction of organic matter. Humus is 1% of the organic matter fraction. Think about organic matter being 1.6% and talk about 1% of that. There's the resource that drives the microbial community. So we have to get some focus on the design and build so that organic management becomes easier after the fact. If you analyze the cost factor of good soil to begin with versus increased management after the fact, with an increased cost for poor soil, right? So good soil in the beginning, you pay a price for it. But after the fact, all of the intensity of management that goes into a poor soil, and you still are hard pressed to probably meet a good communicated set of expectations. So good soil equals healthy plants equals a lower cost. So we have effective strategies in the world of organic land care to manage to a very high degree of expectation. But we all know that it all begins with the soil. If we have a terrible soil and an extremely high expectation, organic management can be difficult, and it doesn't need to be that way. Let's talk just a little bit about the word regenerative. That's the new buzzword. Regenerative is being talked about a lot. I've heard of people trying to develop regenerative standards and saying that organic's not good enough. Organic land care just isn't good enough. We have to have regenerative standards. Well, when you really think about it, regenerative simply means that we're leaving the soil in a better condition than we found it. Instead of taking all these mineral nutrients and decomposing organic matter to grow plants and just taking from the soil. Our focus moving forward has to be that our management strategies continually give back and build soil. So, with that in mind, regenerative is a concept. Regenerative is a protocol, and everything about the standards for organic land care inherently is regenerative, because if you follow our standards, you are going to be regenerative. And so, we've had our feet in the regenerative world for 20 years. We don't want anybody to forget that. And that's going to simply always be a discussion that, yes, organic land care is good enough, because organic land care by definition is regenerative. It just wasn't called that 20 years ago. So the more that we can do in our industry, the better off we will be. The better off we will be if we can self-promote. We do need to promote ourselves. There's nobody out there that's going to promote for us. We have to talk about ourselves. So again, those success stories, and I would love to have success stories to take around with me nationally. And the funny thing I run into, and they all say, well, you're from the Northeast. You guys have it really easy up there. Everything's easy to grow in the Northeast. Winter comes and weeds die, and you don't have to fight it around the clock. And you have, 48 inches of rain a year. And so what do you guys know about how can this ever pertain to other regions of the country? Right? But they don't talk about the 48 inches of rain a year and the fungal disease that we can be fighting on all kinds of plant material. The fact that winter dormancy doesn't necessarily break the cycle. So it's no easier to manage here in the Northeast than it is anywhere else. It's about building the body of knowledge and information so that people can understand how better to manage it. The conventional industry knows who we are. So there's no question that the major chemical manufacturers know all about Connecticut NOFA. They know all about the organic land care program. They can probably identify some of us by name as being thorns in their sides. And that goes for advocates and practitioners. And that's a good thing. That is a good thing that never wants to stop. You always have to poke the bear. And, you can see what's happening with the bear, like the bear lawsuits and all of that. It's on our side. They're getting poked pretty good. The dicamba lawsuits in Arkansas, when dicamba was sprayed and wiped out hundreds, thousands of acres of production crops. So the more the bear gets poked, the better off we are. So they know that we are a force to be reckoned with. They know that we're gaining an increasing portion of the market share. True Grain and all the rest know that when they pick up the phone to cold call sell to a consumer, they're getting more and more people that say, no, I'm not interested in those kinds of services. So the table is set for us. The organic land care industry is not going to go away. I assure you it's here to stay. And each and every one of you in the room has an important part to play, in the day-to-day operations of your business, but how you and your business can have a big part to play in the national future of our industry. So, I always, in closing, I'll say that, I always have the highest respect for all AOLCPs for taking the step to gain the knowledge that it takes to do what you do. I wouldn't have read the list of the original Organic Land Care Committee if I didn't have them in the highest respect, Priscilla and Mike. I don't think anybody else is on the call that was part of that, but that's a big deal. That is the big deal that got us to where we are today. And that was the platform. And now Dina, Jeremy, Monique are carrying it on to the next however many years that's going to be, with different strategies, with strategies that may adapt to the time, and some of the things that can make really big change. So with that, thanks for your attention. And Jeremy wanted to leave, I think, a little time if anybody wanted to, discuss back and forth their questions. So I'll turn it back to you, Jeremy.
Thanks, Chip. Wow, that was great. And just to reiterate, the AOLCPs here, not only landscapers, but also increasingly so, advocates who are taking, who are becoming accredited in organic land care are extremely and more and more important pieces to the puzzle. So thank you again. And thank you, Chip, for that great talk. We do have a couple of questions. Monique is going to be handling the Q&A. So Monique, I'll push it to you.
Okay, Stan, here I am. Yeah, and if you want to add more questions into the chat as we're winding down here with Chip, feel free. The first was actually a mention from Kathleen where she said, we need more West Coast professionals. And I'm sure she's talking about organic professionals. So how do we spread the word to the West Coast? Do you have an idea on that, Chip?
I do, and I think I didn't realize Kathleen was here. Kathleen Halal, Diana Carbononi, who I mentioned, Vanessa Armstrong, AOLCPs, advocates that have become AOLCPs. Yes, it needs to be spread. There is a very powerful group, Rika Gopath, that's working up in Northern California, all up in Sonoma, and all up north of San Francisco. And then the Organic Land Care Project, which is the 3 women I just mentioned, focusing on Southern California. But we need more practitioners in the industry because the demand is there. I mean, I'm working with Vanessa on a huge homeowner association, and I'm dealing with a conventional landscaper, and I wrote a 40-page report, and they came back with a bottle of urea and said, is this good for liquid fertilizer? So the education gap is huge. So yes, Kathleen is right. We're working to focus on building up Southern California. The biggest change nationally, if we got practitioners out there, could happen so fast. And if Southern California goes, and you know, the original, a lot of the driver of this in California is Orange County. And Orange County until very recently was a very strong, you know, red county. And, you know, it was all chemical oriented, organic, and it's changing. So if you can change in a very strongly Republican district and open people's eyes to embracing organic, now we just have to get the people there that can provide the services.
All right, I agree. That's excellent. This is tied in a little bit from Jamie Banks. What incentives are needed to get a product industry started growing out west? And you touched on that. But what Jamie really was wanting to know what made it happen here in the Northeast that's different from the situation out west.
Yep. I meant to reference Jamie too, because Jamie, and again, thanks for all of your work. What she's doing is hugely important. So Jamie, appreciate everything that you're doing. Yeah, the product discussion, it's amazing. You would think that in the Los Angeles area, you could get whatever you wanted. I've actually been sort of backed into developing a fertilizer product and trying to get it made up there so I can just supply it at my cost to projects so that they can try organic. It's just not there. So in the Northeast, it was, we had, I can tell you now, and Mike, if I, you know, you can tell me, but we had here North Country Organics. We had Paul Sachs, and Paul and I are the same age. He's actually a year younger, but I always called him the grandfather of organic, and good friends. And so we had a company here that in the early years, he was the guy, and he got us what we needed. And then, you know, we have, you know, Peter Schmidt, Compost Works, we have Tecterra Environmental, we have all these companies that sprung up in response to the demand that was created by all the projects that all of us as AOLCPs were working on. So that's what built the critical mass, was having practitioners on the ground that said, hey, I need to get fertilizer. I need to get some humic acid. I need to get, you know, some type of a soil amendment, and companies popped up to be able to do that. We're at the point in Southern California where this organization was 15 years ago. And so honestly, I tell people all over the country, everybody thinks California is so forward thinking. They're light years behind us, honestly, and like 15. And so that is the focus, is trying to get the demand. So you get a landscape contractor like this guy I'm working with, and he's got to find 4 ton of fertilizer. So he's going to go to a distributor and say, I need 4 tons of an organic fertilizer. And the distributor doesn't even know where to get it. So now we kind of have to, it's our job on the ground out there to connect the dots.
Awesome. All right, thank you. All right, so we just had I have a quick question. You have many talents, but I wasn't aware that you also help individuals write organic standards, as you did for the college students that you told us about. Would you be willing to help any of us if we had a good idea to help us write those standards? Are there any that you think we should look at?
Sure, no, I'd absolutely be happy always. You know, that's always been a standing invitation on my part, and I know Mike and a bunch of the rest of us. Yeah, whatever. Absolutely happy to work at that level.
Excellent, thanks. All right, here's one from Denise. Or actually, it says Kevin Fretz is here in Orange County, and we are serving Southern California and wherever we are needed. And we've joined forces with Rachel and Kathleen. Are those people that you know of?
I don't think I know Kevin. That's fantastic. I mean, Kathleen, if they know Kathleen, then that's the real deal. That's fantastic. And I would love to connect personally there's so much going on out there and try to, you know, build that body of practitioners. So yeah, thank you for reaching out, and I'd love to connect.
All right, so, and this chat, and actually we were recording this, and so this and the chat will be available to everyone who's gathered here today, probably a couple of days after we download it. Here's one from Deepika, who's very much involved in the organic and working with the land. Chip, who can I contact to get more information on how to deal with heavily used town sports playing fields? Our town groundskeeper insists that he must spray once a year for grubs and weeds like crabgrass to keep the players and their parents happy.
Happy to reach out to me. I've been managing sports turf organically for one site for 18 years. Never had a chemical in 18 years. If I have a grub problem, it's a tiny little thing, and the system usually gobbles them right up. So, yeah, I mean, that's like what you say, what you reference is a very, very common thing within a municipality. And that is sort of the first, that's the excuse why they can't go organic, right? I mean, anybody that knows anything about grub control knows that if you do it correctly, even if you use a chemical, if you do it once, you probably don't ever have to do it again, you know, because the grub comes back to where it was. So the idea that you put grub control down every year, you know where that came from? That came from a salesman that told this guy that he has to put grub control down every year. The salesman did it because it was his mission to generate revenue and sell product. When everybody in the world knows that grub control never should go down every year, not even in an IPM program, let alone, you know, that's strictly just chemical mentality. So I'm happy to talk to you about that. That's what I do most of the time is intersect in that discussion.
All right, great. Here's one for Priscilla Williams. Chip, thank you for filling in the history of the OLC program for the newer professionals here today and for your many years of pioneering work. I'm interested in knowing more about the soil test for soluble carbon and who offers it.
You know, Woods End Research Laboratories down Maine. Will Brenton is generally regarded as one of the top 2 or 3 compost experts in the world. And Woods End Research was a compost research laboratory. And they have gone into developed a soil test that they call a soil health test. And it's about $95 a sample. And what they do is you punch in the zip code where that soil came from. Now, we may have if it's a native soil, that's entirely relevant. If it's an engineered soil, well, you know, there's a coin flip, but you put in the zip code, you send them the sample, and they do all of the, respiration tests on it. They look at the microbial respiration. They look at soil chemistry. They look at what is available through the biomass. And then they give that soil both a soil health score and a soil fertility rating. independent of fertilizers. And it'll tell you right off the bat what you have for fertility there and how it stacks up to other soils in your zip code, and then how the healthy soil is functioning from the biological perspective, integrating with chemistry. One of the tests that they offer in that panel is soluble organic carbon. And that is the measure of the exudate. And so where I'm building up this database. I've got probably 8 or 9 sites around the country, all over the country now, where we've got the initial test in place, and we'll probably do another 9 or 10 this year. So yeah, I encourage all of you to reach out to Amy at Woods End, and yeah, huge information comes from that test.
Wow, thank you for that. From Troy Moon, which Mike suggested we also cover during the happy half hour, but I would love to get your perspective on this. In Maine, landscapers are worried about a new model for compensation. How do they move away getting paid for treatments versus getting paid by clients for consultation and specific outcomes? Any recommendations for landscapers who are worried about how to make that transition?
Yeah, great question, Troy. And that is sort of what we try to impart to landscapers is your approach. It's a different type of an approach now. So an organic landscaper that's properly trained has invested time and money to get to that point, and you should be paid for that. So when you take on a client, it doesn't matter whether it is in grass, turf management, or any other aspect of the land management. You're generally thinking in terms of multiple years involvement. In other words, you're presenting it as you're going to be involved with them to take care and change their landscape, because we all know there's a transition period, a process, and it doesn't happen. Chemical management, you can start chemical management on April 15th and just pound the synthetic fertilizer and some pre and post emergent herbicides and some grub control, and all's well with the world. We don't do that. We still put down fertilizer. We still manage cultural practices. We still, do all of those things. It's a matter of teaching how to reframe that we're not going to put out a program where I'm going to come to your house 5 times and I'm going to put something down. And I'm going to take that, 350, 450 annual program and divide by 5, and there's the cost of the program. We present it differently. That, on this one, we're going to come and we're going to be building soils and present it that. So that's when I work with a landscaper, or when I directly teach and have more time. When I do when I do this course, I have about an hour and you can't get into all of that. But that's what I try to impart, that it's a whole different model, that you're not making your revenue now on, buying a bag and turning it over, flipping it over and putting it down. You're making your money in another way, overseeing the management, the integration of cultural practice with organic product to meet a communicated expectation and deliver the projected outcome. And so you're exactly right, Troy. That is how we have to work with landscape contractors that are so used to just taking the product side of it, billing it out, dividing it by 2, 10%, 15% prepayment discount, and all of that. That is the conventional model. But, those of us that work in the organic, yeah, we have a different model. So very important to teach.
Excellent. I wish we had more time to do more questions, but we're going to have to move on. I'm going to let Jeremy jump in here, and thank you. That was a fascinating talk, and we all really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks
very much.
Thanks. Thank you, Chip. And thank you, Monique, for doing the questions. For anyone who hasn't, who didn't get their questions answered, please stick around. Between 5 and 5:30, we're doing a happy half hour where we'll grab a beer, some wine, and have some open discussion. So, Monique, if you could make Troy a co-host so he can share his presentation. So Troy, our next speaker, Troy Moon from the city of Portland, Maine, is someone who we worked with for the last 5 or 6 years, who's done amazing work up in Portland and southern Maine, getting what really is the strictest pesticide ordinance in the country. And he can talk to you about that. And he's done, what they've done up there is truly incredible. So, to introduce Troy officially. Troy is the Sustainable Coordinator for the City of Portland. Troy started his career with the City of Portland in 1997 in the Department of Public Works on improvements to the solid waste program. One of his first was helping to implement the curbside recycling and pay-as-you-throw trash collection program that began in 1999. During his time in Public Works, he managed several programs, including solid waste, parks and open spaces, and island services, but sustainability was always an important aspect of his work. This included promoting waste reduction and recycling, supporting community gardens, recycling, reducing pesticide use on city property, and climate action. Troy worked with interns on the city's first greenhouse gas inventories in 2001 and 2005, and collaborated with a team of city and school staff to draft the Municipal Climate Action Plan in 2012. In 2016, Troy moved to the executive department and took on the role of sustainability coordinator. This has allowed him to focus attention on some high impact projects that advance the sustainability goals established by the City Council, which are reducing the city's greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by 2050 and running the city on 100% clean energy by 2040. And again, I can't say enough about the work they're doing up there. Our work with Troy has brought us to Portland a number of times to train landscapers in the last few years. So without further ado, I'm going to let Troy take over here. And Troy is also going to be joined by his colleague, who was a recent hire. And Troy, I'll let you introduce her as well.
Great. Thanks, Jeremy. I want to show some pictures. I like to show pictures. So I'm going to show a few as part of our talk. Get to the present. So yeah, thanks again. And I think this is going to be a great follow-up from the talk that Chip gave. We're going to do a little bit of history nationally and a little bit of history from pesticide ordinances here in Maine, which Chip noted there are 30 different ordinances across the state. And so as Jeremy mentioned, I work with the City of Portland in sustainability. And today I'm going to be joined by a sustainability fellow, Casey Zorn, who recently joined our team. She's a recent graduate from Tufts University with a degree in English and engineering, and she's working with AmeriCorps and will be with my office for a year or so. We're also down a position, as Chip mentioned. A lot of municipalities were severely impacted by budget cuts related to COVID. So I have a sustainability associate position that's open currently, as we want to make revenues aren't quite still what they might be. So we're a little reluctant to bring a new hire on right at the moment, but hopefully we'll be able to get up to full strength again shortly and have more folks working on the team. But so Casey's going to join the presentation. She's done some research on pesticide applications across the country, pesticide ordinances around the country. So if you could unmute Casey, that would be great. She'll be presenting a couple of slides here in just a moment. But also, Chip and Jeremy have both mentioned that South Portland also has a very strong pesticide ordinance in some ways, where following them, they did a great deal of research and groundwork to come up with ordinances, and our ordinance actually is closely modeled on theirs. And we continue to work closely together. In fact, we work so closely together that we developed our climate action plan that was just released and adopted by our city councils. We have one climate action plan for both cities, and we call it One Climate Future. Just that recognizes the connections that Portland and South Portland have with our sharing the Fore River and sharing the ecosystem, and our residents live and work in each other's communities. So it's an amazing partnership, and that we're kind of cemented with our long-term commitment to climate action, and certainly our organic practices are an important part of it. So just a couple other things that our office works on. I mentioned One Climate Future, which is our joint climate action plan. We work really closely together working on a clean energy transition. I spend a lot of time working on energy policy and energy projects. So the city is City of Portland now is signed on to get 75% of our electricity from solar sources, which is great. We are working with the private sector on trying to help them calculate how much energy they use to become more efficient. We've been real leaders in the issue of single-use plastics, particularly. Portland was the first city in Maine to regulate plastic bags. We're the first city to ban plastic straws. We banned polystyrene foam, styrofoam packaging back in 2015. And also we have this pesticide ordinance now that we are really proud of. And our residents, I think, take a lot of pride in the fact that we're an organic city. And as part of our climate action plan, we have several key initiatives and steps we want to take. And one of the goals, of course, is to nourish our ecosystems, which nourish us. So we've really embedded, and that really means taking care of our soils. So as Chip mentioned, soils can sequester amazing amounts of carbon. So we're committed to managing our lands, our open spaces in ways that can capture carbon as opposed to release it. So we have hundreds of acres of park space that aren't managed intensively, the low maintenance areas. We have hundreds of acres of wooded space, and we have many acres of regular traditional type park space that we manage entirely without pesticides. So here I'm going to let Casey jump in here and take over a few slides to give us some history, just a brief history of pesticide ordinances around the United States. So take it away, Casey.
Great, thank you so much, Troy. Yeah, as Troy mentioned, I am the Sustainability Fellow with the City of Portland, and today I'm going to be focusing our discussion of history on how we have gotten to the place that we currently are in the US in regard to local pesticide ordinances and the movement in a few states, including Maine, as you will later hear about from Troy, toward restricting cosmetic pesticide application on private properties. Though pesticide regulation on the state level began earlier in the 20th century, it wasn't really until the 70s and 80s that they really began being adopted as local ordinances and pesticide bans. In the 1960s, however, this was kind of the time when scientists started reaching consensus about an awareness about the harmful health effects of pesticides and herbicides on humans, animals, and ecosystems, especially in regard to human reproductive health. In 1979, as you see on this little timeline, one of the first pesticide ordinances was passed in Mendocino County in California, which prohibited the aerial application of phenoxy herbicides, a pesticide mainly used in the state for killing weeds which threaten grain crops, and occasionally used for commercial timberland to retard unwanted growth during reforestation, which was actually the main use in Mendocino County. The pesticide was and is known to be a public health hazard, known to cause birth defects, miscarriages, and cancer. About 2 years earlier, before the ordinance, a forest products company had sprayed 500-acre tract land with phenoxy herbicides, and the drift from the spraying had extended nearly 3 miles from the spray location, and school buses from 2 different school districts were actually sprayed. There was public outcry, and local residents commenced a campaign to prevent the aerial spraying of the pesticide. In 1979, the voters of this county approved an initiative that prohibited the aerial application of phenoxy herbicides because of the dangers of drifts, contamination of food and water, and irrevocable harm to natural resources. They also noted that its application threatens the rights of the people of Mendocino County to be secure in their homes and enjoy the peaceful, undisturbed use of private property and public lands. So already in this wording, we begin to see the use of this term private property in regards to pesticide management. Then in 1984, this ordinance was brought to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decision upheld the rights of citizens to adopt more protective standards than the state and federal government. However, shortly later, the California legislature adopted legislation to preempt that right, which we will see is a bit of a trend. About 10 years later, in 1991, A similar case was fought in Wisconsin that revolved around pesticide restrictions and the concept of preemption. In this case, Ralph Mortier applied for a permit for aerial spraying of a portion of his land, and the town of Casey, Wisconsin granted him a permit, but with specific restrictions regarding which tracts of land he could spray on and other restrictions regarding whether he could actually aerially spray. Ralph Mortier decided to bring a judgment action against the town of Casey in the Circuit Court of Washburn, which found that the town of Casey's ordinance was preempted by state and federal law, ruling in favor of Mortier. This then moved to the Wisconsin Supreme Court, which held that decision, but then later this was actually brought to the US Supreme Court, which ruled in 1991 that the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, FIFRA, which, as you all probably know, is the national legislation concerning pesticide regulation, does not preempt local jurisdictions from restricting the use of pesticides more stringently than federal governments. However, states can still preempt that authority. This set a precedent for state preemption of pesticides and deliberate wording in the case of federal preemption. The pesticide lobby formed a coalition in response to this, called the Coalition for Sensible Pesticide Policy, which would help states form legislation to preempt and restrict local bodies from passing ordinances regarding the use or sale of pesticides, especially on private property. And many states that would pass this preemptive legislation would have almost identical wording to the wording of the coalition. A bit more on state and federal preemption. These two court cases set the precedent for state preemption in the US. About 30 states would later adopt explicit preemptions, entirely blocking local pesticide ordinances. A step below this is limited preemption, in which a state has a commissioner or pesticide board that theoretically can be petitioned by local municipalities seeking stricter pesticide legislation. This type of preemption applies to 14 states, including states like Connecticut and New York. 5 of these states with limited preemption explicitly know a locality's right to petition, such as in New Jersey and Michigan. And then there are 7 states, including Maine, which have no state preemption. This concept of state preemption largely colors the landscape of local pesticide ordinances across the US. Moving a bit away from the US up to Canada, while these two legal battles were being waged, in Canada, pesticide management progress was much more progressive and making faster headway, decades ahead of local US legislation. In the village of Hudson, Quebec in 1991, they passed a municipal bylaw, the first of its kind in North America, which banned the use and application of pesticides on both public and private property for non-essential or cosmetic uses within its boundaries. This was the first example in North America of extending such an ordinance to private property. Like in the US, there was heavy pesticide lobbying in reaction to this bylaw's passage. However, the Supreme Court of Canada did uphold the ruling in 2001, confirming that a town has the right to ban pesticides within its borders. Since the passage of this bylaw, around 125 similar ordinances have been passed in towns and villages around Canada. And also there was the first province-wide ban on local pesticides in 2003 in Quebec. This was also a huge step for the US, as it would influence our own local governments to implement similar legislation here 20 years later, as we will now hear. In 2013, as we heard, in Tacoma Park, Maryland, a city of about 16,700 residents, they unanimously passed the Safe Grow Act of 2013, which generally restricts the use of cosmetic lawn pesticides on both private and public property throughout the city. This was the first time that a local jurisdiction of this size in the US had used its authority to restrict pesticide use broadly on private property, like they had done in Canada. And it built upon that Canadian legislation bringing into the US, but it also built upon 2 domestic US policies in Washington, DC and in Greenbelt, Maryland. The Washington, DC Act offered protections from restricted pesticides on properties near waterways, schools, daycare centers, and city-owned property. And the Greenbelt, Maryland Sustainable Land Care Policy of 2011 strictly prohibited the use of synthetic chemical pesticides on all city-owned land. However, Tacoma Park's great achievement in their ordinance was that it did broaden these restrictions to include private property, and it also expanded the pesticides that were prohibited to include those prohibited by some Canadian laws, and also that were considered endocrine disruptors by the European Commission. So again, using that international influence to really make their policy the best it could be. As the biggest and most restrictive pesticide ordinance in the US at the time of its indoctrination, the Safe Grow Act has served as an exemplar for other ordinances that have been passed since. Now, Troy, if you could skip to the next slide. Here we see a map from Beyond Pesticides of the local ordinances across the US. I would really just like to point out the localities that are labeled with blue. These are the localities that have passed pesticide restrictions on private lands as well as public lands. Right now, there are only 3 states with local municipalities that have passed such ordinances. Maryland, which has expanded such progressive municipalities beyond Tacoma Park, as well as Maine and Vermont. It is also important to note what all 3 of these states have in common, which is that they do not have state preemptive legislation in regards to pesticide use. This, of course, makes it a lot easier for these states to create such progressive laws and ordinances. And as we look forward into the future of pesticide ordinances, we'll likely see this similarly in states that do not have preemptive legislation. Though, of course, states like Connecticut that have limited preemptive legislation could potentially petition to their pesticide board to pass such progressive legislation. Now I'm going to pass it back over to Troy to speak on the history of pesticide ordinances, specifically in Maine.
Great. Thanks so much, Casey. That was really thorough. Appreciate you taking that part of this presentation. So just to kind of drill down a little bit onto pesticide ordinances in Maine, as Chip noted earlier, Maine has been looking at this adopted pesticide ordinances in 30 or so communities across the state. And a lot of these, and again, it started a long time ago. A lot of these are smaller communities. You can see in the map. I managed to squeeze most of them onto this part of the map, but Maine, as you probably know, is pretty rural. So we have wooded areas. We have small towns on the coast, and everything in between. And towns adopt ordinances for different reasons. So as far back as 1970. Maine citizens started to become very concerned about pesticides. And so Isles Head, which is a small community on the coast, and Limestone, which is a small community in northern Maine, not near the coast, both adopted ordinances for different reasons. In Limestone, it was concerned about aerial spraying in the logging industry. And for most of the communities in the wooded parts of the state, the ordinances they developed were really about that, because the big forestry companies wanted to control insects on their forest lands that they harvested mostly for paper, and sprayed pesticides that landed on homes and in the communities, and people were very concerned about it. And Owl's Head, being a coastal community, was largely concerned about impacts on coastal waterways and fisheries, which is a theme that you'll see throughout the history of pesticide applications and ordinances in Maine. Brunswick, Maine, which is at 20,000 people in their town, is one of the larger towns in Maine. They passed a pretty comprehensive pesticide ordinance in 2005 that restricts any applications on aquifer protection zones. So that is any of the coastal lands that are directly on Casco Bay, but also wetlands and areas in the interior part of the community that are important habitats for aquifers and well water. And then in 2014, Agunquit, which is a small town of less than 1,000 people, but it's a very popular tourist town. They were the first town in Maine to ban pesticide applications on public and private property, and they were very influenced by Tacoma Park, certainly. And it's been, they've done a great job, and they certainly served as a strong example for our the rest of the communities in Maine, including Portland and South Portland. So our residents and officials were looking really closely at Agunquit and what they had done. And that's certainly influenced the work that we've done. And South Portland went forward and adopted a pesticide ordinance in 2016 that prohibited the application of any synthetic pesticides on public and private property. And they're, again, one of the larger communities in the state. And then we followed suit in Portland in 2018 with an ordinance that was very similar to theirs. But we added some extra enforcement teeth into our ordinance that South Portland didn't have. And just recently, just literally a week or so ago, South Portland updated their pesticide ordinance and kind of reworked it as a land care ordinance in general, and they've added prohibition of synthetic fertilizers as well. So they've gone completely organic for land care on both pesticide elimination and requiring organic fertilizers. And I suspect Portland will be following suit. Our city council has been watching very closely with the fertilizer ordinance, and we'll be taking that up very soon, I suspect. And so we've talked a little bit about preemption. Casey mentioned that that's been a real problem for some communities around the state who want to do local pesticide ordinances. In Maine, we are really strong on home rule. In fact, we've written it into our state constitution. So pretty much, unless it's specifically controlled by the state, local jurisdictions can regulate pretty much everything. And our Maine Municipal Association is our association of all of our towns and cities, and they kind of are the watchdog of local control. And if there's any ordinance, anything at the state level that comes up that might interfere with municipal home rule, they alert their members, and we typically mobilize to reject it. And so, in fact, since the Portland and South Portland ordinances have come into effect, there have been 3 separate attempts by opponents of local pesticide regulations to enact state preemption, and they've all been defeated soundly at the legislature. So some of them were kind of those model ordinances that Casey mentioned, and in one case there was a kind of a sneaky one that got put into an ordinance that was about tick research, and they had stuck in a line about controlling local ordinances that got sussed out and stripped from that bill. So again, even though we have strong local control, we have to be mindful that certain people and industries are concerned that and would like to take that away from us. So the reasons why Portland, South Portland, and Mainers in general enact pesticide ordinances, I'm sure, are very familiar to everyone at this meeting. General broad concern about the health and safety of pesticides. We all are aware that there's serious negative impacts not only on soil health but potentially on pets and children who might come in contact with pesticides. And one thing that came up pretty strongly here in Maine, in Portland particularly, is that there's a sense that state level rules and regulations and enforcement are not adequate. There's only a small number of employees for the Board of Pesticides Control that do investigations and enforcement, and they can't be everywhere across the state. And so the things, it's just lacking. Enforcement's lacking, and people don't feel protected. There's definitely concern that if people, you might want to have a pesticide-free lawn or property, but your neighbors may not want to, and so pesticides that they spray may impact your property and affect your pets and children. So that was definitely a concern. And overall, concern about environmental impacts in general. We mentioned Casco Bay, which is the part of the Atlantic Ocean that Portland sits on. A lot of the things that we do for environmental protection in Portland are related to protecting the health of Casco Bay. It's important. It's an important fishery, but it's just sort of just a cultural icon here in Portland. One of the reasons people come to visit us is because it's beautiful and people can enjoy the water. You know, there's lobsters and fish, and it's great. It's a great place to be. And so we have a very active organization called Friends of Casco Bay that their mission is to protect Casco Bay. And so they've done testing, and they continue to do testing over, currently for a lot of different pollutants in Casco Bay. And they certainly discovered that pesticides are showing up in the water, which, it runs off of lands in onshore into storm drains, streams, and into the bay, where it presents challenges to wildlife. We certainly know that neonics are threatening and harming pollinators, and we've certainly seen impacts on fisheries. So protecting the water is super important for us here in Portland. And in terms of how our ordinances came about, I don't think we can say strongly enough that citizen action is the reason why there are strong pesticide ordinances in Portland and South Portland, and increasingly discussion about having stronger pesticide ordinances around the state. So even though we adopted our ordinance in 2018, literally decades prior, citizens in the region were concerned about pesticides, applications on parks and gardens, on rights of way, on sidewalks, and were letting their opinions be known to their elected officials. I remember even back when I first started working in the city over 20 years ago, local citizens were active against spraying weeds on sidewalks. I remember seeing an article in the old Casco Bay Weekly, which was a weekly paper here in Portland. That many communities have similar ones, that talked about the toxic 10, and there were different industries and companies that were polluting the environment, and they added the city of Portland to their list of toxic 10 for the sidewalk spraying program to eliminate weeds. And so it's definitely been controversial, and people have been concerned about it. So it just seems like a matter of time before pesticides became restricted more broadly. And so we had a public process, again, following suit to some of the work that they were doing in South Portland. We had a task force that reviewed approaches. There was a stakeholder group that had activists as well as landscape applicators and other professionals. It went to our city council sustainability committee, which ended up choosing to adopt an ordinance very similar to South Portland's, as opposed to some of the recommendations that came from the previous task force. And in 2018, we adopted it, and now it's been coming into full effect. It certainly went into effect on city property right away. It took effect on private property last year, and this year it's to take effect on some high-use athletic fields that had gotten a pass for a few years while they made a transition to organics. And it's been a struggle for our ball fields crew, particularly, to get there. And Chip has been helpful. He's been visited us a few times, and he mentioned that Stonyfield grant during his talk. And the city has one of our athletic fields that's part of that Stonyfield grant, and is undergoing transformation to organic practices right now. And we're really excited to see what can come of that. It's the soils there, or it's basically old fill, so the soil is not in great shape to start with, and we're looking forward to trying to make that field to be really excellent with specifically with organic practices. Again, what is our product? What does our ordinance prohibit? Basically, it prohibits all synthetic pesticides. So no application of anything that's not on the organic program national lists, or is not a minimum risk pesticide. We also prohibit the application of pesticides of any sort within 75 feet of a water body. And that's a pretty good chunk of Portland, being a coastal community, and we have several streams that run through the city. So it's pretty strict. And, we have resources that we apply. We have a city website that includes, information about the list, and we refer people to Omri. We also have a few exemptions. And, it's basically a land care act. So some of your typical like pet shampoos and paint, those sort of things are exempted because it really does focus on land care. We do have some exemptions that were incorporated. So, health and safety applications. So poison ivy, ticks and mosquitoes, carpenter ants and termites are exempt from the ordinance. And actually, if you're around town and you see an applicator sign, typically it's for carpenter ants, which are a problem here in Portland. We have one golf course in Portland that's owned by the city actually. So they were exempted, but they were required to achieve certified Audubon cooperative sanctuary status. Is quite a mouthful, which they accomplished this year. And even without that, and this is a great story, the superintendent of the golf course was not excited about this transition to organics and was kind of resistant. But we signed him up for the organic land care program course with Chip, and Chip was one of the instructors certainly. And he actually was like seeing the light. He has become one of the biggest champions for organics and managing his golf course organically. He does not, they are quite 100%, particularly on the greens, but it's been a major transformation. Now he has beehives around the course. He's set up bird habitat and nesting boxes, and it's like night and day. So Gene, who is the superintendent, is just a super champion, and we really love what he's doing out there at the golf course. So we had a couple other exemptions as well. The weirdest one is invasive plant application, treating invasive plants on city property. But luckily the Parks Group doesn't do that very often, but they still have to report that to my office, and which we in turn report to the City Council on an annual basis. So we have a citizen advisory committee that kind of oversees implementation. So I'm the staff person. We have a practicing agronomist. We have 2 licensed landscape professionals, and one of the professionals is required to be certified, be an OLCP, which is great. And we have 3 representatives from the public who are on our committee as well. And so what we do is, we review applications for waivers. We do have a process where it's very strict and hard to meet, but we have a process for waivers. We work on outreach and education, and we report to the City Council on how things are going, and we can recommend changes or improvements that might be necessary. And as mentioned, waivers are really hard to get, and rightfully so. So the only reasons that you can get a waiver is if there's a condition that offers immediate threat to public health or safety, to control invasive plants that pose a threat to the environment, or to protect buildings and structures from damage. And that's it. There's no other reason. You can't, I like to tell people who call me up all the time, it's like, no, you cannot get a waiver because you don't like dandelions. So people are kind of, the public is making that adjustment. They might call and talk about trying to get a waiver, and usually I'm able to talk them out of even applying most of the time, because generally it's just not something that's going to meet the standard. So we're really trying to work on getting people away from waivers and really thinking hard about making that transition to organic practices. And so I mentioned that we do have an enforcement practice, and we try to focus on education. So we haven't taken enforcement action against anybody yet per se. People have been pretty responsive to the ordinance. And so, so we go out there. We actually generally, I would send people postcards and letters upon complaint. We track all of our complaints from about pesticide use on our city. We call it See-Click Fix. People can use an app, or they go online and they can report a pesticide use if they see someone using pesticides or some mysterious application signs on people's lawns. and we can follow up with the homeowners. And as I mentioned, typically it's been people who have done an application for ants that were coming in and destroying their home. So that's generally been the approach. But we can, if someone's going to be a real bad actor, we can find them, and hopefully it will never come to that. But that's a tool in our toolbox that we can take. And then one thing that we find, and especially talking to homeowners or landscapers, we get really caught up in the whole what product you can use or what you can't use, and which is I find really frustrating, because I mean we want to get away from the whole notion of applying things in the first place, because we don't need to. As Chip mentioned, it's really about soil health. What practices can we take, and how can we educate our residents that you don't need to have the 3-step program. You don't need to throw chemicals on your lawn, fertilizer. There's just really simple things you can do that aren't expensive, and that you can do every day, every week of the year. So we talk about the typical things: mowing high, letting your clippings stay on, being really judicious about your fertilizers, and not over applying, because certainly nitrogen is a huge problem for coastal waters, and we want to stop nitrogen pollution. Overseed and aerate and water appropriately. I mean, really, those are the things we're trying to get people to do, to get just get away from having to have a company come and do those treatments. I think it's sort of changing people's aesthetic, really. I mean, once upon a time, clover was an important part of everybody's lawn, and just reminding people that clover is a great thing, and you don't need to get it off your lawn. In fact, it helps your lawn. So just changing people's attitude, and the same for professionals. I mean, I talk to applicators and landscapers who are angry about the ordinance, and we talk about that kind of the question I had asked Chip, like making that transition to not being an applicator so much as being a land care practitioner and protecting the health of the soil, and charging people for the outcomes. Go in and talk about how you can make their lawn healthy and green and pleasant, and being compensated for the results of the work that you're doing, as opposed to being the guy who just comes in and throws stuff on people's lawns. And I think it seems to me that there's a huge opportunity for landscapers and land care professionals in this area, because a lot of people want to have a nice lawn. They may not have the skills or the time, and so these are the type of skill: testing soils and consulting with how to manage your property, and then doing the handwork that might be required. There seems like a real opportunity there. So that's what I talk about to people, to professionals who want to complain about our ordinance. And then we have a website, of course, that the public is welcome to go to, and certainly invite anyone else to go and see what's on our webpage. And I'm sure people have a lot of questions, and I'm happy to take some.
Thanks, Troy. Sorry, let me get my video on here. Thank you. And thanks, Troy and Casey, for that presentation. Really interesting stuff going on in Portland. One question that came up here is let's see, let me find it here. How to deal with homeowners' mosquito and tick pesticides versus athletic use.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a tough one. Because mosquitoes are technically exempt from our ordinance, but we don't have too many people who spray for mosquitoes per se here. Our biggest concern is ticks. Trying to educate people about just if they want to keep an area that's free of ticks, to just mow an area. Just you can use your lawnmower, and then look at there's a few products out there that might be useful for ticks, but really it's like everything else, doing cultural practices to keep keep ticks at bay. And same with mosquitoes. I mean, people can be careful not to leave things out that become mosquito habitat. So that, those are the things we really recommend, folks. And fortunately, mosquitoes aren't a huge issue in Portland. At least I've lived in Maine my whole life, so maybe I'm more immune to mosquitoes, or they don't bother me as much. But I don't find them to be a huge problem here. I know in some other parts of the state, near marshier areas, there's been concerns about mosquito control. So.
Very nice. We had one question here from earlier as well. Let me just try to get that up here. Do you have any suggestions on how to approach towns or municipalities on going organic if they have no current pesticide or any sort of language written in anywhere?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I'm giving a talk to a committee of town councilors and citizens in a town just up the road here in Yarmouth, Maine, right after the new year. And that was led by, it's really, and Chip talked about it, and, certainly it's been our experience here is local action, citizens who are concerned about pesticides, raising the issue with elected officials, and it might take some time to keep the conversation going. So I mentioned that over the years, some really persistent folks kept talking about pesticides to their, city councilors. And once some of the larger communities, Portland and South Portland adopted ordinances, it really spurred other communities. So, I get calls from citizens in other communities who, I can't go to their town and advocate necessarily, but I can provide information like this talk and some of the things that we do. So for instance, and this is a great example, there was a woman in Yarmouth, the town that I'll be speaking in January, who had started approaching me about a year ago for information about the ordinance. I was able to connect her with some of the citizens who were instrumental in our ordinance, and they were able to give her some ideas on how to organize her neighbors and other people in the town. I gave her some tips on how she might talk to some of the elected officials and some of the things that they might be concerned about. And so she did that legwork, and that's really what it is. So she reached out and did that work, and the town agreed to create a committee to look at the issue. So that's what it really takes. It's a piece by piece incremental approach and building momentum. Really, that's the way to do it.
Nice. Another question here. What were the key strategies of motivating the other representatives in your jurisdiction? And while you think about that, could you also put up the slide with the website ordinance info?
Oh, yeah.
That's two parts.
So, and I'll give, there was a bunch of slides I kind of just skimmed through. So I will share those with Jeremy. And let's see, go back to, yeah. So yeah, I'll share these slides with Jeremy. It has, some more details about our ordinance as well, and some of the history that Casey and I covered. So in terms of motivating residents, I think, we're fortunate in Portland that our elected officials are really progressive, and largely our citizens are too. So it's a receptive audience. But I think, in some ways it's leading by example. A lot of times, being the largest city in the state, what we do here in Portland, people kind of, I think other communities look to us for leadership in a lot of ways. So that helps, I think, another community when they see, okay, well, it's working. This type of approach works and can be adopted in our largest city. It should be able to work in other communities as well. And that's certainly found with some of the other measures we've taken, the plastics ordinances, et cetera, and recycling. But again, I think it's just homework and legwork and grassroots activism. Certainly going back in history to 1970, a lot of those smaller towns that adopted ordinances are, town meeting towns. And so it's literally, convincing your neighbors that there's an issue and they should support it.
Thank you. another question here I got privately is what do you see Portland's next steps in the pesticide ordinances? Do you see it getting more strict? Are there plans for you know, non-exemptions, for example, athletic turfs? Where do you see this Portland going in the next 5-10 years?
Yeah, so I think I see us, I think I see us adopting the organic fertilizer ordinance as well, kind of following suit with South Portland to, just sort of create, instead of pesticide and fertilizer ordinances, just create organic land care ordinance in general. So yeah, and I see, we're supposed to be moving towards fully organic ball fields and athletic fields this year as well. So I think, one of the things we need to do, and partly it's resources, is just more education and outreach and, teaching homeowners how to manage their lawns organically. I mean, I think a lot of people in Portland don't do a lot of intense management on their lawn anyway. But the folks who do like the lawn folks who really care is convincing them that that clover is good. It's my message. Yeah, that's sort of, I think it's hard to get much more strict than we are now. But just helping people embrace it more intentionally. I also want to see us do a amendment to our site plan review process to require better soils for new construction, particularly, or for renovations when people are making major modifications to their property, so that what they're trying to grow grass on, or or some sort of green infrastructure on, actually has healthy soil and not just a bunch of gravel that they throw grass seed on. That would be a healthy one. Oh, and then largely, I think more widespread adoption of green infrastructure in general. Not even just lawns, but how we manage stormwater. Stormwater is a huge issue for us. We're spending literally millions and millions of dollars upgrading our stormwater system, and just to focus more intently on green ways to manage stormwater. I guess I see moving forward more strict rules about requiring properties to manage stormwater on site. Particularly for new development, so we're not adding additional water into the stormwater system. So that would involve a lot of maybe green roofs, and certainly grain gardens and other types of infrastructure on private property. We're seeing that starting to happen, but we need to be much more intentional about it.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And to those of you who I haven't been able to get to your questions, again, we'll be hanging around from 5 to 5:30. Happy half hour. So we will happy to do an open discussion there. So again, Troy and Casey, thank you so much for your presentation. Really great stuff coming out of Portland, Maine. And I wanted to add a little bit that in areas where you are having trouble getting started, it really starts with education. So contacting your local representative, or if you have a group together, like there's a bunch of groups in Portland, and just starting to get something going. The University of Texas Medical School is now organic because of 2 people who are AOLCPs. The whole campus isn't, but it's starting small and growing out from there. So thank you again, Troy and Casey. I really appreciate your time here and your insight. So if anybody has any more questions, feel free to plug them into the chat, and we'll try to get to them at a later time. And I'll also share Troy's PowerPoint with you in my follow-up email. So Troy, if you can send that to me as well. Thank you again.
And I have to hop out for another meeting, but I'm going to come back. I'll be there for the 5 o'clock half-hour happy hour.
Perfect. Thank you, Troy. Thanks, Casey. At this point, we're going to take a 15-minute break. Let me just triple check the schedule to make sure I'm on the right. Yeah, we're going to take a 15-minute break, and we'll come back with Ed Toth. So everyone, feel free to grab a glass of water, grab some food, and we'll meet back here at 2:45. Thank you.